Alrighty, so I am going to call this meeting of the Canmore Planning Commission to order, and I'll start with a land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation, I acknowledge and appreciate that we are meeting today in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. This land, which is impacted by the decisions we make today, is the traditional territory and home of the Stoney Nakoda nations of the Bearspaw, Goodstoney, and Chiniki, the Blackfoot Confederacy of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the District 4 Métis. And as we gather in this Treaty 7 territory, we acknowledge that we are all treaty people. I commit to working to live in right relations and to advance truth and reconciliation, and to acknowledge the many First Nations whose footsteps have marked these lands for generations. And I would also ask for people presenting today, if you have not presented to Planning Commission recently, when you introduce yourself, please identify which pronouns you'd like me to use in addressing you, so I don't just make assumptions about that. So before adoption of the agenda, I would ask each member of the town's administration in attendance today to introduce themselves.
Harry Schneider, Senior Development Planner.
Annika Drost, Development Planner.
Nathan Gravel, Development Planner.
Lauren Miller, Manager of Planning and Development.
She can. Okay, so my name is Whitney Smithers, and I will be the chair for this hearing, and all questions and comments should be directed through the chair. The board members today, I will ask you to introduce yourselves, starting on my right.
Councillor Tanya Faubert.
Miranda Spessot, Public Representative.
Brian Talbot, Public Representative.
Florian Youngin, Public Representative.
Jeff Hillside, Council Member.
Sean Kennedy, Public Representative.
Okay, thank you. And I believe, and I'll ask administration to confirm this, that at this time we don't believe that we're going to be meeting in December. Is that correct? Okay, so as such, this will be Miranda and Sean's last Planning Commission meeting. And Councillor Faubert, my apologies, Councillor Faubert. So we will endeavor to make this as entertaining and memorable as possible. And we thank you very much for your service. And yes, thank you very much. Alrighty. So to the Secretary, are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the agenda as presented?
No.
Okay, so I'll move that we adopt the agenda as presented. Those in favor? Okay, so that's carried unanimously. Are there any, to the Secretary or Commission, are there any additions, deletions, or changes to the minutes of the meeting that I need to pull up on my computer? October 25th, 2023. Thank you.
One minor change in the decision, it says additional 8 parking stalls. I think that should read 8 additional bicycle parking stalls, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, thank you for that catch. Any other additions or deletions for the minutes? Okay, so I will move that the Commission approve the minutes of October 25th, 2023 as amended. All those in favor? Okay, and that is carried unanimously. So for this afternoon, the process will be as follows. For most of the items, we'll be asking administration to present the matter that's for consideration before the Commission. Commission members can then ask questions of clarification of administration. Then at our discretion, at the Commission's discretion, we may ask the applicant to make a presentation. And then we can ask questions of the applicant. If there are any members of the public that want to speak to an item, at the Commission's discretion, we may allow for that. And I would just remind everybody that all communication is to be respectful and on topic of the application. So with that, for our first item, which is PL 2023-0003, 829 Main Street. We did have some discussion on this item at the last meeting and then tabled it to today's meeting. I know, Mr. Schneider, there was some interest in seeing kind of an overlay comparing the facade allowed through the bylaw with what's being proposed. If you want to maybe start with that, and then if it works for the commission, maybe we'll go right to, after your review of that, maybe we'll go to questions of the applicant.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. This isn't an overlay per se, but what this does show, as which was captioned within the original PowerPoint presentation from October 25th, this does show the land use bylaw illustrations on the left, which with the applicant's proposed side elevation on the right. I'm just going to highlight here. So this is the, where my cursor is, this is the side view on top. That is a table or an illustration within the land use bylaw. And this is plan view, which would show it from above.
Okay, are there any questions of administration? Mr. Youngkin.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. I guess what I would be interested in knowing is just like how much is the proposed building projecting into that required setback? Because I don't think it's that substantial. It would be nice to actually see that and maybe dimensioned.
Okay. Unfortunately, yeah, the land use bylaw goes from 1 to 4 meters. So at the top of the building, it would be a 4-meter setback at the roof.
Okay.
I think it's 1,500 consistently. Yeah. So it doesn't step back. It stays relatively flush as part of the building design.
Okay, so those 4 meters include the 1 meter setback from the property line?
It does, and that gives room for like a gable treatment or
Yep.
things like that.
So it looks to me like the eaves of the proposed building are projecting maybe like 2 meters into that recommended setback. Like if you take away the 1 meter from the property line, and then it's also set back a bit. The eaves are set. So I guess what I'm getting at is the amount that the proposed projection into the setback is relatively minor. Like we're talking about 2 meters maybe?
Approximately, but it was, when staff evaluated it, it was more the position of the balcony.
Okay.
However, I will say that the applicant's architect is here
Okay.
and could shed some light on that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of administration? No? Okay, thank you, Mr. Schneider.
Okay, if I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to introduce the applicant's team.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so today we have Barry Nostransky, who is the project owner, Heather Barnsley, who is with TI Studios, the architect and designer, and Josh Kaler of SBL Contractors. He's the design build contractor on the project.
Okay, great, thank you. And I know at the last meeting, one of the reasons that we tabled this is there were some questions of the applicant. So maybe we'll just, I'll open it up to questions from commission now, and I don't know which of the 3 of you will be best suited to answer the questions. I will leave that to your discretion, okay? So to begin, questions. Mr. Youngkin.
Thank you. Maybe I could just ask the same question there. Can you give a dimensioned projection into the setback?
So I'm Heather Barnsley, she.
Yeah, sorry, just a reminder, the meeting is recorded, so if,
No problem.
yeah, you need to speak into the
Heather
mic,
Barnsley,
thanks.
TI Studios, architect. With regards to overstepping the property line, is that what I was understanding the question?
No, the projection into the required setback of the
setback?
eaves, yeah.
So, yeah, so I don't have the Revit model here, but I can find out for you exactly what the setback is, but ideally, like, we're not overstepping the property line at all, and we're within the 1 meter overhang allowance, but I'll text the office and they can figure that out. The one, we had a set of drawings that were added here.
Oh, actually,
Which one? Oh, here they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Because I know that there was a request for us to update the renderings to reflect a bit more of context, where the design came from, as well as the building adjacent. There was questions on proximity to that building, so I will leave these up here. Back to the original question of why I'm up here. If you can just repeat your question.
So
Your mic.
there's a required setback for the eaves in the bylaw, and the proposed building projects into that. And I think last meeting there was some concerns from commission members about that. So I think if you're proposing a variance to the bylaw, it'd be very useful to know how much the eaves are projecting into the required setback.
Yeah, and so we can do an overlay. I think it sounds like that was requested, that we do an overlay of your bylaw requirements over our building. Again, that's not a problem. I do want the owner of the project to come up and talk about the historical referencing. I know that there was questions last time about the existing settler's cabin. So if that is something that you'd like us to speak to now as well. Barry, did you want, yeah, come on up.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to remind those in the audience that if you're coming to speak, we do need you to speak directly into the microphone. Otherwise, it's not being caught for those who are watching live. Thank you.
And I think what I'll do, because there wasn't really a question yet on the historical referencing, but maybe I'll ask if commission would like a presentation from the applicant. Yes. Okay.
Sorry, hi guys, that's Josh Keeler. I just wanted to answer this variance on the front setback. From my understanding, in our application, there is no variance on the setback. There was an original application that didn't make it through planning, where we had looked at projecting onto the sidewalk to do some sort of, let's call it pedestrian interaction with the building. That has been removed from the project. This current version is not a variance on, like, there's no variance being asked for.
Could I get clarification from administration about that? Because to me, it seems pretty clear that there's a variance.
There's a variance, but that's not.
thank you. Again, this is the illustration that was put in the original form. One of the things that the town center district does not regulate is a specific 4-meter setback. This is an illustration which speaks to section 11.5.3.2, which talks about buildings stepping back from the property line. It basically shows how it could and it should be, but it doesn't specify that this 4 meters is enshrined. Also, there is a 1 meter setback from the 1 meter front yard setback from the property line, which this respects. But as part of the overall discussion of conformance of this to the principles and specifications of Section 11, which is the community urban design guidelines and standards, this is something that came up because it doesn't quite fit within that shoebox that 11.5.3.2 contemplates and is illustrated within the town center land use district.
Okay, Mr. Ingan, did you?
Sorry, just to follow up on that, in the presentation that we have, it shows from section 4.1.8 that there's that setback at the top there. So that's in part 4, not in part 11. Is that correct?
Yep, that's in part 4. That shows how it would be translated with the typical building form that you would find within the town center district.
So it's not the same kind of building envelope like you have in R1 districts where that, a projection into that envelope is a variance?
In my opinion, not specific to the town center regulations, but it's part of a larger discussion regarding this application in Section 11.
Okay, thanks for the clarification. Like, the reason I'm kind of going after that is because I think that was one of the main concerns raised last time we met about that projection. And although it's not dimensioned, sort of what I'm gathering from these drawings is that projection is not that substantial. It's I guess that'll be for our discussion later on, but I'm just trying to figure out, how substantial is this issue that was raised?
Okay, I think that, yeah, the issues were really around that end, as well as the facade articulation, right? But I was thinking maybe at this point we'll go to the applicant if they want to present, because it sounds like the meeting recording was viewed by the applicant. So yeah, maybe we'll go to the applicant for presentation to speak to the concerns that they heard at that last meeting, and then we'll open it up to questions from CPC. So if someone from the applicant wants to come forward, that would be great. Oh, there, I just turned it on. Okay.
Oh, hi, I'm Barry Nostransky. First of all, I'd just like to thank you guys for tabling this meeting so that we could be here. I'm not sure why we weren't last time. There's just some confusion as to whether we should be here or not, so it certainly wasn't a disrespect to the committee, but we're here now. So we did watch the meeting and all the questions that you had, and so I don't know in depth how much of a presentation you want, or do you want to ask me questions of it? Maybe I'll start with just a general description of what our whole philosophy was, and then from there you can dive in. The whole Settlers Cabin building, when we purchased it from the Evans, we were very, very respectful of the history of it all. In fact, if we are into, let's say, month 13 of our development permit process, we spent about a year, 10 months to a year prior to that, looking at what is the approximate date of the building. Is it something where could we move it somewhere? Is there somewhere in town where we could have somebody accept the building? Could we have it moved anywhere in general? And it seemed like every time that we went down a road of trying to find a solution, there was a U-turn coming back of either people didn't want it or the logistics of finding land in Canmore to put the building just didn't make sense, so on and so forth. And so, my wife and I, Taryn, we met actually online with the historical group in town, and we were working with Ron and Jeannie at the museum as well to say, listen, I know that probably the best use of preserving history would be something like the Moose Hotel in Banff, where you could build something around it, but due to setbacks and due to just the limiting sizes of a 50 by 130 lot, that option wasn't there. So we looked at, okay, what kind of options can we do for an ode to the history of Settlers Cabin and Canmore as well. So really what it's come down to after getting into dead ends over that year process and then going to the development permit stage was, what's our best effort to respect the history of Canmore. And so if you look at the design of the New Settlers block, the base of the building, we tried to use the design of Settlers Cabin. Moving up with the whole design of the building, we tried to keep in mind the Canmore Hotel and the Miners Hall to kind of keep that facadism. Our original plan actually 2 years ago had a brick front, and that's more of a Banff thing and maybe a Park City, Utah thing, not necessarily a Canmore thing, so we had pivoted there as well. In addition to, the Canmore Engine Bridge was taken into consideration, mainly because when the Canmore Engine Bridge was reclaimed about 10 years ago, my wife was following where this wood was going, and it originally landed at the landfill site, and somebody at the landfill site had phoned a gentleman down south with a place called Salvage Solutions, and that person ended up reclaiming all of the bridge. Fast forward to 2 years ago, I ended up buying the entire bridge from this individual with the purpose of, one, using part of the engine bridge in the house that I built on 2nd Street, but also using the remaining amount for exterior details, interior mantles, any kind of decorating, that kind of stuff, to try and, you know, keep the history of Canmore going. So, you know, I know the word facadism is kind of being brought to the conversation, and that is true. But our whole intent all along was to try and respect that this was a building with locals that, you know, opened up a business in the 70s and were well respected for years. We certainly didn't want to come in and disrespect that. So, you know, that's kind of the history and the philosophy of it all. So if you have any specific questions of anything else, please do ask.
Okay, any questions of the applicant? Mr. Taylor? Talbot, I did it again. Mr. Talbot.
Yes, that's fine. Mr. Nostransky, my concern previously had to do with massing and articulation on the upper stories. So it has to do with the community architectural standards, kind of honing in around building massing, kind of 11.5.3.2, which talks about stepping back the upper floors and varying roof lines. And I do get that, you know, section 11 could be classified as a little bit stale. However, it's something that's there within the present. What is the rationale for not adhering to those standards?
Some of our original renders, like, you know, if we go back 2 years, some of our original designs, we did have a significant step back in it. It almost made it worse. Like, maybe from the front it did help, but if the more you step back on the front, if you're looking at like a 45-degree from the street, it could reveal the building next to it if it was the same height and kind of give too much of a step back. We also wanted to utilize it. We hadn't explained this last time, but in this render, I don't know if you can see on the left side of the building, to the left of our project, as you're standing on the street, there is a house that's going to be there. It'll be something eventually, but right now it's a house. And so our plan was to do some kind of a mural on the side that would represent something of the history of Canmore, so if people were coming by, they could actually not look at the side of a cinder block building. And then any kind of amount that we would be above the restaurants to the right of us, you know, we would do the same kind of thing. But it was interesting in those first kind of mock-up drawings to step it back even further. It made it worse. And so within, at least from my perspective, I didn't ask for this to be in the front. It was more of, if we're going through the process of building this building, can we limit the number of variances that we were asking? And this is kind of where it came out at the end of the day, to maintain our square footages. And square footages didn't necessarily need to be the max at the sake of the community of Canmore. It's just that once you had hallways and elevators and all that kind of stuff, it turned into more of a practical, two-dimensional kind of thing. And then, because ultimately with blueprints, you start off with a two-dimensional floor plan, and then from there you get your exterior elevation, and then you kind of tweak it from there. So I would say that's more of a symptom of that than anything else. It wasn't necessarily this has to be exactly right there. It just kind of turned into that with all the details of mechanical, hallways, etc.
If I could do a follow-up. So there is no physical limitations from the design that would prohibit a articulation or setback in the upper level?
I'd have to lean on those guys right there. I mean, in theory, I would lean on them, because they're the ones that kind of put the whole building together. Because sometimes too, when you get commercial buildings that have 3 levels, that have commercial on the bottom, you need mechanical somewhere, and I don't, they'd have to answer how all that lines up. Like literally 3 feet could make the difference of having a building work efficiently and not, kind of thing. So
Yeah, I understand that. Looking at your floor plans, those areas tend, if the floor plans are accurate, tend to be non-mechanical areas in that upper level. The other component is how this fits in with the whole block. So that's one other reason I'm honing on this. I'm going to give my time to other people because other people may have questions, but.
That's an interesting question of how it fits into the block, because I'm not sure how many buildings fit into the block themselves, depending on where you look. You know, from the 80s design of like the, I don't know if it's pink or yellow or whatever the side of the building is, to turrets in the 80s, to whatever else. Like our general design wasn't necessarily to say, let's pick something from the 80s. It was more of what buildings in town speak to us that would have been historical, like the Miners Building, the Canmore Hotel, and then from there, let's build a design from there. So that was more of the thought, not necessarily, you know, the other 80s builds that are there, or whatever year they were built, kind of thing. No disrespect to them, but that's just kind of how the process went.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions of the applicant? Okay, Ms. Bussett?
Yeah, I have a follow-up question, because I think our main focus in this is the section 11.5, the architectural guidelines, and the extent to which this deviates from them. So I'm wondering, and maybe this is a question for your architects, if you could explain a little bit about which of these principles might have helped guide the design.
Okay, and you know, before they answer too, like there was no directive from the ownership group to say that we had to impose on that 3rd level coming this far forward. And I'm sure you can kind of surmise from when Josh stood up, the intent or the understanding is there wasn't a variance that was going to be asked based on what we proposed. And so as an owner of the group, and I have partners, I'm sure they would agree with me, is that if we're talking a couple feet here and there because there was a misunderstanding, I mean, that's not necessarily our hill to die on. But if you ask me questions of how it got to this point right here, it would have been under the assumption there wasn't a variance based on the fact that it was town center, and this is what you see here as a result, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I think I'm trying to understand the extent to which the architectural guidelines that are in place were reviewed and consulted and helped inform the design that we have in front of us today.
I think, though, the disconnect is between like the town center, the rules of it all. Like the question that was asked over here was a very good one of what is that exact amount, but it wasn't really looked at because that's not really necessarily how it's framed. Like there really isn't a box for this to fit in. It's almost like a discretionary use within a discretionary use kind of thing. And so, you know, I understand why you're asking the question. I guess I'd ask in reverse is what number do you want to see? Because it seems like there's a variance of what that could be, like what would make everybody happy and we can all work together kind of thing. But there doesn't seem to be an exact number because that was never, if it would have said it cannot be any more than X, then we would have followed that. But that's not necessarily how this section for the town center usage works. You know, and to your point of single family homes, they're pretty basic from there. It's like it can be no more than this, and that's that, and you follow the rules. But this one seems to be a bit of a gray area, which is causing discussion, and maybe a little too much discussion. Like I think if it's something that can be solved, then let's solve it. Like what number do you want to see? You know, if I ask you what number do you want to see, you may not have an answer, but you're asking us this question in this direction, and we don't have an answer because the rule's kind of a sliding scale, if that makes sense.
Okay, Mr. Talbot, did you have another question?
This is a question for administration. Mr. Schneider, in regard to this commission's ability to make decisions that may run contrary to Section 11, and I'll use an example, is 11.5.3.1 says, a high degree of both vertical and horizontal facade articulation is required. So it's the term required. So if we were to render a decision where there isn't in our potentially the required articulation. And I know this is a little bit gray, so I'm just want to make sure that we actually have authority to do this.
In my opinion, the commission can vary the requirements of Section 11.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions of the applicant? Councillor Hillstad.
Thank you. So again, I think some of the confusion with the facade part is that the actual variance is the balconies, as the variances for the second and third floor balconies to be set back 0.6 meters from the property line instead of the 1 meter. So at that point, would it be possible to have the balconies actually be at the 1 meter and not the encroaching into the setback as they are now? Because that is a variance within the plan, as that is clearly in Section A of our schedule as a variance. So just your thoughts on the
Reducing
balcony.
them to 1 meter. Okay. Where are we at right now? We're at 5.5 feet. So my background, while we're waiting, my background has been a lot of residential building, and I find, and we'll find out what this is exactly as far as where we're at. I have this thing of decks and usability, and usually I like to be at 7-8 feet for usability to put chairs and tables and decks and all of that. I think we're at about 5 feet-ish, and this was a question that we had. What are we at?
So the 1 meter setback would face the lower floor.
Yeah.
The upper floor step back.
So what are the size of those
First
decks?
floor does protrude as a camp.
And what's that width of that deck? So I can answer his question.
It's 0.4 because it's into the setback or 0.6 meters away, so it'd be a 0.4 meter. So it's not a lot, but it's just, again,
So
it is a variance, so.
3 foot 7 inches right now? So if we went back, we'd have no deck. Okay, so right
So-
now, just with the size of the deck, if we did go back, we would remove the deck. Like right now, it's not even really a deck, it's at 3 foot 7 inches.
And,
So-
but couldn't you technically remove just floor space from step back the wall and leave the deck same width, just you lose that 0.4 into the floor area?
Would you like to just speak to him, because I know what you're saying, but.
Yep.
To answer your question, Josh?
Sorry, it's Josh Keeler again. That was the original variance that we were requesting before we stepped it back, because we had that projection further out. What that was originally designed as was let's say a nod to the Canmore engine bridge. So those little beams that are stuck there are actually beams from the bridge. We had the same steel structure that the Canmore bridge is made out of to wrap around that front, and we had projected it over the sidewalk, well, to the sidewalk, not over the sidewalk, but to the sidewalk, so that it almost created like an interactive space when you're underneath. It kind of looks like you're walking underneath the Canmore bridge. That was under the recommendation of administration. We pulled that back to its current location so that we weren't at property line and we were under. So that is the, let's call it the architectural element to the building to kind of create that steam bridge look on the lower floor. And then that lower floor, the windows, the way that they step mirrors the current settlers block building. So to pull that back, that element would be entirely removed from the project. You wouldn't have that, let's call it a reference point that ties the bridge. And we have those beams secured and ready to go in, and they're from the original Canmore bridge. So I think it would be, ownership would like to keep that if possible, because it is tying the projects together and ultimately a historical reference point.
Thank you. That explains why it's overhung and why there's a variance. So that's very helpful. Thanks.
No problem.
Thanks. Any other questions of the applicant? Councillor Faubert.
From my understanding around this particular variance, it's related to the second and third floors. What about the third floor? That's kind of, it's a very flat front, but the design guidelines talk to a step back on those levels. The first level, you maintain that architectural goal of the engine bridge, but on the third level, what about that one?
Yeah, so the second level and the third level both step back at the same consistent plane from the first. So that was the step back to kind of create that, let's say, from a profile to match what Canmore was, has in the guidelines. If the question's more along the lines of, when we look at the face of the building, that it's fairly flat and it looks more like I guess like the old, what do we got, the old bank hall and the miners hall. I know we're really focused on the step back side, but is the question more related to the peaks and valleys that you see more in like the very modern sort of cookie cutter style architecture that we're seeing Canmore? Is that what we're getting?
It's
Sorry.
more in relation to section 4.1.8, figure 4.1-1
Yeah.
that was shown earlier, where at the top, it goes backwards, it's not the figure from your report, it's from ours, and that's from the. So if in the future, all the development on Main Street follows the rules that are set out in this rule, you would have at that third level a bit of a space where the building goes backwards along the entire street, except for this building at that third story. And I just.
Would it be more desirable, and I think we're okay with suggestions at this point, of course, but would it be more desirable that the second floor and the first floor were in the same plane and the third floor step back? Is that more desirable? Because that's okay too.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I think that's not what my question was, but
Okay.
I'm good.
Sorry.
Okay, Mr. Talbot.
I do believe if you address the step back in the third level, that should, if you look through all the illustrations in section 11, there is a fair amount of, and it's not a peaks and valley issue, because we're not talking about a flat roof versus a peak roof here, we're just talking about articulations and setbacks. So Councillor Faubert's concern about the future is mine as well. You have adjacencies that if they are built to the current standard, there's going to be this one building that stands out. And the reason for those articulations aren't just a visual aspect, but it's view lines too. And sun is some of the reasons that those are originally put in. So I think if the applicant can see its way to looking at that third floor setback or a step back, then that would satisfy my concern.
Okay.
If you step back to the third floor, can you overhang, have a covered deck on the back?
Yep. I know what you mean. Yep.
Is that a possibility?
It is, if it would just be like a set of stairs now.
Yeah.
But if that's appealing to the council, I think that's fine with us too. We can even agree to that at this meeting, is that if we take this entire top section and push from this line right here back to this line to set that the third floor back.
Just slide the whole third floor back, so it would be kind of a partially covered deck on the second unit of the back side, alley side, but we're not even close to.
Yeah, we're not even close to anything there, yeah.
Councillor Faubert has a question now.
So I think for me, it's less the balcony and more the roof form,
Yeah.
right? So right that area there. And so that's what's not lining up with the figure from the land use bylaw and then the idea of the future. And so I'm not sure that it's the balcony.
But even still, we could actually, it could be a double win here. We could make our deck bigger. If we think of them as 3 shoe boxes, so the third shoe box on the street side, if we slide that back, the deck gets a bit bigger. There might be an overhang on the back, but now we have the 3-floor articulation and we're all happy.
So if I can jump in here, I see that the applicant is really hearing the concerns of Planning Commission, so thank you for that. I do have a bit of concern that we're kind of redesigning a building on the fly, and I don't think that a change to a condition or an amendment to the condition is really going to do it here, because this is whole new sets of plans. So I am, I guess, looking to administration to maybe suggest the best way to proceed on this, because like I say, I mean, I think if we make an amendment on the floor of commission today, you've got a whole set of plans that aren't relevant anymore related to your application. So Ms. Miller or Mr. Schneider, can you speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So there's probably 2 options in the way that we could approach this in moving forward. The commission could table the matter further, give direction to the applicant as specifically what they'd like to see changed, and we could bring those revised plans back to Planning Commission for review and decision, whether that be in a month or 2. I'm not quite sure. The applicant might have to, we might have to talk about what that would look like. The other option is to refuse the application as it is presented today, and then they would come back with a new application. But I'm pretty sure that if it's refused, they would have to wait 6 months before they could bring back another application. So we're kind of in a murky situation either way.
So I think what I'll do then, oh, sorry, Mr. Kennedy?
Just a clarifying question. When I'm looking at the drawings, it looks like the rear setback at 5.4 meters, and then there's probably 5 to 7 feet that you set back further than the rear setback. And I'm wondering if that would allow you, something to consider would be, you have space there to where you potentially could keep things the way you want them and just do a slight slide and be out of variance. Just a clarifying question on the setback in the back. That's all I was asking. I'm not saying do anything.
Yeah, I think we're entirely open to the concept that we can slide this project back. The only question I would have for council is, like, if it did slide back out of the variance, does it pass the architectural requirements, or are we just pushing the building back and still not solving that?
So I'm going to make a suggestion, because it isn't lost on me that the next 2 items on the agenda are revisions to approved permits, where once they get into it, they had to move some things around. So what I'm going to suggest is that we, and this is to Planning Commission members, that we table this item to come back after item 3. I think that will give the applicant some time to think about how much time would be required to produce new drawings that reflect some of this conversation today, and then the item can come back and be considered, and then we can make a decision on that, and then in the meantime we can address those other 2 items. Is that acceptable for folks? Okay, Mr. Younggood?
Just for discussion, from my perspective, we have to be flexible with the Part 11 architectural design guidelines, because they are guidelines. And this is sort of a new sort of style of building for us that we don't typically see. But in my opinion, there's been quite a bit of effort in achieving achieving the standard that's required by the guidelines, as in the guidelines set a minimum standard, a minimum bar, and I think this project has gone to some lengths to present like a quality architectural statement, whether you like it or not. you know, that's not really what we're here to decide. We're here to decide whether it meets the minimum standard. So I just feel like there's a bit of resistance because of the overall look of the building, and I think that we should look at the guidelines as guidelines and not completely as prescriptive requirements. So I'll just make that point.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. Thank you for making it. So I am going to, I guess, make a move that we table item PL 2023-0003 till after item 3 in the agenda, which is PL 2023-0343. All in favor of that? Okay, it's carried. So Mr. Schneider, if you can maybe have a conversation with the applicant and figure out, you can come back to us with timelines after that. All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
So next we will turn to item 2, PL 2022-0317, which is Unit A at 1 Industrial Place. Mr. Gravel, you can make your presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the CPC, and those watching remotely. Again, my name is Nathan Gravel. I'm Development Planner for the town of Canmore. For this application, I'll begin with a little site context. The site is located at 1 Industrial Place. The slide on the screen shows the location of the site relative to the area. Development has commenced at the site with completion of Building 1, located on the north side of the site, as well as site works surrounding the building, which again you can see up on the slide. Adjacent to the site are a variety of uses and features such as the Victory's thrift store to the north, the rail line to the east, residential homes across 17th Street to the south, and a jewelry studio to the west. Bit of site or street view for you of the site and 17th Street as well. Moving on to a summary of the application. The application proposes site and building amendments to DP 2018-298, a mixed-use development that was approved by the Canmore Planning Commission on August 28, 2019. The amendments are to the second building and surrounding site works. 5 variances to the land use bylaw are required. I'm only really going to cover the height variance during my presentation. The variances related to the look of the building are considered minor by administration and were covered in the staff report, but by all means, if the commission has any questions about those, we can certainly dig into those as well. Finally, administration supports the proposed amendments. Skip that slide. Okay, getting into the changes in more detail, the development contains employee housing, which is a discretionary use in the district. The applicant proposes revisions to the units located in Building 2, specifically increasing the number of units from 26 to 43, a change to the layout and the number of bedrooms. The previous approval included only studio units. The applicant's proposing a range of units now, some studio units, 1 to 3 bedroom units, and a couple of 4-bedroom units with shared facilities. There is a common rooftop patio and amenity space that's been added to the building as well. In administration's opinion, the changes in unit types should help to ensure the units are used as intended through design. For example, the addition of the units with the shared facilities should help to encourage some rental housing. Finally, the applicant has confirmed that the condominium bylaws in place include a requirement for all units at iPlace to be occupied by employees as defined by the town's land use bylaw. As a result, administration is supportive of the proposed changes to employee housing at the site. There's been a bit of shifting to the site works, but generally everything is the same. The footprint of Building 2 is generally the same. The surrounding site works in terms of where the parking lots are, where landscaping is, pathways, bicycle parking, etc., is generally consistent. There has been an increase in vegetation at the site in terms of trees and shrubs, and a slight decrease in parking, but both of those changes comply with the land use bylaw. So I'm not going to get into those in great detail. Aside from generally maintaining the original footprint of Building 2, the architectural design of the building no longer reflects that of the original design. There's been substantial changes made. The applicant's preference really to increase the number of units triggered the need for changes to the building. The applicant decided to propose a building that they believe is most appealing, rather than trying to maintain the previous architectural form. As mentioned, these changes trigger 5 variances to the land use bylaw. In administration's opinion, the appearance of the building is an improvement over the previous design. Looking at the height variance, the maximum roof and eave-line heights permitted in the district are 11 meters and 7 meters respectively. Development permit DP 2018-298 granted approval for roof and eave-line variance of 12.49 meters and 8 meters respectively. Building 2 proposes to increase this. The proposed eave-line height is predominantly 9.68 meters, although there are some areas where the eave is 11.56 meters in height, which is really just a factor of the eave being cut back further. The proposed roof height is approximately the same at 12.5 meters, although the roof variance is considered different by administration because the design of the roof is different itself. And you can see that up on the slide. The red line represents the maximum height in the district. The top image is the previous design of the building. So you see some areas encroach past maximum height, some are below. The below image is the proposed development, so you're seeing a much more consistent encroachment beyond the maximum height. In administration's opinion, the variances have little to no impact on the adjacent lots. The development is located approximately 44 meters from the nearest or from the rear property line of the residential properties across 17th Street. Given this distance, the variances are not believed really to impact those properties. The front building massing of the development, so along Industrial Place, is considered comparable to the previous design. Although the building eaves are a bit higher, the development steps back as it increases in height, so it sort of maintains that building mass, which limits its impact on the adjacent parcel to the west. This building 1 is located approximately 2.6 meters from the north property line, which you can see up on the slide there. It's really not, building 2 isn't really anticipated to have any effect on that property given where building 1 is located, which also received a height variance. The development is located approximately 75 meters from the nearest property line to the east. Again, given that distance, it's really not anticipated there's any impacts on the property. It should be noted that the subject site is a condominium and that the units in Building 1 are now privately owned. The applicant has provided an analysis of the height impacts on Building 1, which were included in your package. The analysis, which included a shadow study and a view shed diagram, the latter of which is up on the slide there, concludes that the impacts on views, privacy, access to light, relative to what could be built under the land use bylaw, which is shown in red. The red is what you could build and meet the bylaw, is not considered unreasonable. In addition, the project offers community benefits, providing employee housing, for example, offers a social benefit, and the project will still meet the highest category for enhanced green construction. That category does direct that the applicant may be eligible for height variances as well for achieving such a high performance. As a result, administration supports the proposed variances. A notice of application was posted on the site for 10 days. Administration did receive some questions, but no formal feedback was submitted. Administration recommends that the Canmore Planning Commission approve PL 2022-0317. The project continues to offer a social and environmental benefit, and the variances are not, in administration's opinion, unreasonable. Should the Commission decide to approve this application, draft conditions of approval have been prepared and set out in Schedule A. This concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions the Commission has.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gravel. Are there questions? Mr. Talbot.
Mr. Gravel, you mentioned that the footprint is the same.
General.
What I couldn't tell from the drawing, doesn't mean it's not there, is I just couldn't tell, does this run afoul of the rail setback at all with changes that went on?
No.
It doesn't, okay. And I couldn't tell from, second question, couldn't tell from the package whether the sustainability aspirations in the original application were used as a carrot, if you want to call it that, for having something approved. I just don't recall that. Like, was that one of the reasons for the approval, was the net zero? And the car share?
I would say that the employee housing was the driver for approval, but the sustainability benefits were
Secondary.
kind of the cream, cherry on top.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Mr. Youngan.
Thank you, Mr. Gravel. I guess my question is why we're comfortable with employee housing in this industrial district and we're not comfortable with employee housing or intensive employee housing in other industrial districts. And for me personally, I'm much more comfortable with intensive employee housing in this district because it is a transitional district. You know, it's maybe almost more commercial than industrial now. There's the presence of phase one, but when you look at the bylaw requirements, there's actually the exact same requirement for employee housing, which states that employee housing must, if it was to be approved, must be demonstrably subordinate in terms of area and intensity. And so with two levels of employee housing on top of the industrial, it's clearly not subordinate in area. And I understand we can grant variances, but maybe you can just clarify administration's position on that.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So I think there's two pieces there. There's one in general, an industrial area. Why would we support it there? I think you've touched on it a little bit. The district is more of a transition district. There's commercial uses in it. It's not quite comparable to the IND 1 and 2 districts in terms of what we expect to see there, in terms of industrial activity. There is the presence already of Building 1, and this is a corner site. So it sort of has that interface with residential across the street. Its location is also quite close to recreational amenities such as a school, a recreation center, grocery stores, bus stop. So we see that it's there are strengths there that we don't see in some of the other districts that would allow for the conversation. In terms of the development itself and the specific rules of the district, I would say that the industrial is still present and predominant in the sense that it makes up the ground floor. The units are designed such that they will try to limit any type of nuisances that come from those units. So there's a much better cohesion between the two different uses. And the applicant has committed to undertaking that work, having a study done, and so forth. I would say that it is a bit subjective in terms of area and intensity, what that means to the development authority, and whether or not you feel fundamentally like the industrial uses won't be able to form a major component of the site. I think personally they will, by making up all the ground floor units and having good design there to support them. I think in the end, we just don't want residential housing here and no industrial uses along with them, or no proper treatment given to those uses such that they essentially are, they're not going to be successful at the site. It's an industrial district. Have those units been set up properly to function? In my opinion, they will function. A lot of consideration has been given to them, so.
Okay. Any other questions of administration? No? Okay.
Great,
Oh,
thank you.
sorry. Ms. Smith.
No, just a very quick thank you for the presentation and the explanation. I just did a very quick, I noticed on the site plan that there's a pathway that's being proposed, and I just wanted to confirm it's going to extend along 17th Street to all the way to the intersection with Railway Ave. It wasn't clear from the drawing, but
Yes,
that
they
might
have-
have just been the way that they were cut off.
I'll bring up the plans, but yes, there is going to be an off-site pathway along 17th. Just bear with me for 1 minute. I'm just trying to bring up the plans. But essentially, there's going to be a pathway connection that provides a pedestrian facility along 17th.
Okay, I was just making sure that it would actually make it all the way to the intersection, because I don't think there's anything there right now on that side of the street, so just wanted to confirm that it does go, it won't end at the limits shown, I think, on the plan that would.
It will be a functional pathway.
Okay.
There'll be a connection to our system, our trail
Okay.
system, our network.
I have one more question, just following up on my colleagues' questions about the industrial and the employee housing. I know aside from I think there was an eatery identified. Do we have a sense for the light manufacturing, like what kind of, I guess, what that might turn out to be once this is developed and occupied?
I would defer that question to the applicant in terms of what they have in mind for tenants.
Okay. Councillor Hillstad.
Just looking at the, just gotta find it here again. I've seen it in Schedule A, I've seen it referenced as 43 units, and then I've also seen it referenced as 44 units, so I'm not sure if there was just a typo error there, and I'm trying to find the 44 units again, but I had it here, and then I went back up to check that it was 43, and now I've lost the 44, so let me see if I can find it here again.
It's a great question. I'll just see if I can bring up the Schedule A.
So basically, the question is it 43 or is it 44? Because at the top of Schedule A, it does say 43, but then I saw another spot that had 44, so now I'm just...
Page 89 and 96, the page 89 reference is 44 extra. So I think it's
Okay.
79, sorry. Employee housing, 44 units.
Yeah, and the report says 43.
Yeah, and at the very beginning of Schedule A, though, it
Yep.
then goes back to 43, so it's just, what's the right number?
Correct. So on the first page, so page 73, Nathan, as you're scrolling, the approved uses, employee housing is noted as 43 units.
Do you want to share your screen? The agenda package I have here, I don't think is the correct package, which is why I can't find any plans.
And now the 44, that might actually be from the original. I think it's from the original one, so then that's where it comes from. So I think that was the total unit count was 44 originally.
Yeah.
Between the two buildings, I think is what it was. So I think it was just, as I was scrolling, I saw 44 and it jumped out and I was like, what is this? So I think it's actually all good. So, yeah. So. Now that I look at it, I see the August 2019, so I think it's fine. Yeah, so the Schedule A was correct. I think it was just, as I scrolled down, there was the attachment 6, and it just, it threw me off, so, because it says 44 there, but I think that was the original one, and that was the total amount of employee housing, so, again, I think it was just, they were so close to the same number, and as I was scrolling through Schedule A, I just didn't notice that it had ended, so that's on me. Gotcha.
Okay, Mr. Kennedy.
Just another little clarifying question. Footprint remained the same, added a floor. Did the first floor industrial space, did it keep all of its ceiling height or its elevation? I think it has 14 feet, 4.5 inches now. Was that the same as it was before?
I think it may have been lowered a bit. The applicant did provide an analysis of the ceiling height and some of the industrial units that could accommodate that, or the industrial uses that could accommodate that.
Okay,
And
so they didn't feel like that was going to impact the
yeah,
primary
we wanted
use.
to make sure.
Okay.
And so in our opinion, yes, there's enough height there to allow for industrial activity.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions of admin? No? Okay, thank you, Mr.
Great,
Gravel.
thank you.
Does Planning Commission have any questions of the applicant? No? Ms.
I
Bissett?
mean, if they have information on what they foresee for the light industrial uses, but I can also understand that. Oh.
Hi, it's Josh Keeler, SBL. Yeah, we can speak to that. We have tentatively a soap manufacturer who's lined up to go into the building. How many units he's taking is yet to be determined, but we have 12 available units. There is also a couple other, when we say light manufacturing, they're more in line with like glass. What is it when you make the little glass? Stained glass? There's a potential stained glass user who would like the space. And a couple other, so a little more, I'm going to say that they're not creating a lot of smoke, fumes, or other, it is light manufacturing. There's no heavy manufacturing that we're aware of, and no one's inquired.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? I see none. Thank you very much. Okay, so I will move then the recommendation that Planning Commission approve PL 2022-0317, subject to the conditions outlined in Schedule A. Any discussion on that motion? Mr. Youngin, yeah.
Yeah, so I will be happy to support this proposal. I think it's great to see dense employee housing developed in appropriate locations in town. I think there's definitely, we need that, and it's a social benefit. It's great to see a diversity of units. There's 4-bedroom units, 1-bedroom units. They're all quite small. Hopefully that'll keep them more affordable. I think the energy performance of the building exceeding what's required by the code is also great, by the bylaw. So I'm happy to support this proposal. I just would like to make one comment about sort of the assertion that the architectural expression has been improved over the original proposal. I think that's debatable. I think that if building articulation is good, then more building articulation is not necessarily better. And I would say that this building is maybe trending a little bit towards over-articulation. I think there's successful buildings around town that have a more monolithic form, sort of like Phase 1. And it's a little bit unfair to Phase 1 because there's originally a breezeway plan there, so there's a bit of a blank wall. But there's buildings like the shops of Canmore or Elevation Place that have a little bit more of a monolithic form. And I think they fit in very well to the community, and they provide a pleasant public realm. So I guess just the point I would like to make is that I don't think that buildings need to necessarily have tons of articulation or that we need to make big buildings look like a bunch of small houses stacked together. So that's just offering a different perspective on that one. But otherwise, I think the building meets the architectural guidelines, and it'll be great to have this in the community.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy.
I echo that. I feel like we get the light manufacturing, it fits in the community, and by adding another floor, we get a lot more housing that is mixed use. And I concur, I think some of the smaller units may actually stay affordable.
Thank you. Any other comments? No? Okay, so then the motion again is that Canmore Planning Commission approve PL 2022-0317, subject to the conditions outlined in Schedule A. All in favor? And that's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So next up, we have PL 2023-0343 at 1734 Bow Valley Trail.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to present Development Permit Application 2023-0343, which is an application for visitor accommodations, employee housing, and retail sales at 1724 Bow Valley Trail. This application provides revisions to Development Permit PL 2022-0303, which was approved by the Planning Commission in April 2023. The development was previously approved for 98 units of visitor accommodation, 1 employee housing, and retail sales. It is located in the Bow Valley Trail General Land Use District, and visitor accommodation is a permitted use in this land use district, and none of the uses are changing with this application. The application has been referred to CPC due to Section 113.2.1D, which requires that applications which amend aspects of a decision previously made by CPC are referred back to CPC for decision-making. The previous DP application was approved by CPC in April. The approval included variances to the maximum building height, the maximum percentage of the building over building height, maximum eave-line height, as well as a reduction in the minimum percentage of the building elevation step back above the eave-line. In November 2023, the applicant has provided revised plans and a written summary of the requested changes, which is provided in attachment 4 of your report. And the amendments are listed on this slide, and I'll go through them over the next slides. All right, so some of the amendments include the addition of 2 surface stalls that were removed from the underground parking and are now surface parking, the resulting removal of the parking island and relocation of the bike racks that were on that island, the resulting reduction in the garbage enclosure width, as well as the addition of fencing in the courtyard for safety reasons. The main amendment is the revision to the seating design within the plaza and its tie-in with the public pathway along Bow Valley Trail. In April 2023, CPC had added a condition of approval requiring the submission of a revised site plan and landscape plan showing improved access from the pathway to the plaza. Since then, the applicant has provided a more organic tie-in, which is reflected in the amended plans as shown in the top right corner of the slide. Further amendments to the previously approved plans include a reduction in the quantity of channel siding on the exterior of the building due to structural support challenges, the relocation of the roof mechanical for loading purposes, and an update to the material tags on the plans to allow more flexibility in terms of manufacture. Administration finds that the amendments are minor in nature and are in compliance with the land use bylaw. And our recommendation is to approve the proposed development subject to conditions proposed in Schedule A. And that concludes my presentation, and the applicant is present
Okay,
as well.
thank you. Are there any questions of administration? No, I don't see any. Okay, thank you very much. Do commission members have any questions for the applicant? After driving all this way? Come on. No? Okay. So I will move then that Canmore Planning Commission approve PL 2023-0343, subject to the conditions of approval set out in Schedule A. Any comments? No. All in favor? Approved unanimously. Thank you very much. I think what I'll recommend is we take a short break to bring the applicant for the tabled item back. 10 minutes enough? Yep, okay. 10-minute break. Alrighty, thank you. So now we are back to the tabled item PL 2023-0003. What we're going to do is invite the applicant back up to the podium to speak to where they kind of landed after their discussion during the tabling of the item. And then I'll move the recommendation and we'll open it up for commission discussion at that time. So I'll invite the applicant back up at this point.
Thank you. Just going to reopen the drawings. So anyway, I'd just like to start by speaking a little bit to the architectural decisions that were made with this project. I'll speak to them more so than the architect because it was very much guided by what we wanted to achieve out of this project. This is very much meant to look like a building in a mining town. We wanted to keep the historical reference back to the mining portion. We weren't looking to treat this as though it's a building in a tourist town. We even applied for a plaque that we'd like to see at the front of this building that would speak to the history of Settlers Cabin, what this building means within the town, and a bit of the history on the train bridge. As much as we could, we tried to salvage material out of Settlers Cabin. We have looked at this building multiple times to try to preserve it. It is a wood building on a wood foundation. Unfortunately, 95% of it's dry rot. I'm surprised it's still standing. I think it's held up by tar and glue. What we can salvage out of it, we believe, is some of the boards across the face. They are currently bright red, but we think if we sand them slightly, they'll be less red. We'd like to put those through the front, let's call it the residential access portion. And at the front of this building, right where the windows curve in, we want to have a historical plaque which speaks to why this building wouldn't look like the rest of the buildings on the street. The mural on the side of the building will speak to the same. We put a nice picture of the Canmore Bridge up. The mural can be anything. It's more of a suggestion than an actual mural. But what we tried to do with this whole project is definitely speak to what Canmore, the mining town that Canmore was, and that this will be a very unique and probably stand out, but that is the intention. Now, the first floor, we spoke a bit to the, let's call it the railway ties that are on the face of the building for the balcony. We had a bit of a debate back and forth on whether or not to make the second balcony very similar, but we did not do that. But we did keep the steel beams on the second balcony so that it actually gives the impression that this is how you would build, a bridge. Steel girders above, down below the rail ties. So the render maybe doesn't show that well, but that, brownish line up above is meant to be the same or raw steel that you would see on the bridge. So the lettering at the top of the building, the signboard, let's call it, does match the Settlers Cabin signage. We went as far as to take the year dates off the steam bridge and put those on the beams. Probably doesn't appear in the picture either, but this whole project, from day one was to try to bring let's call it a mine town or a historical reference point back to that street. There's really only two other buildings on that street that match that, and they are fairly old at this point, and hopefully at some point they will get refurbished or renovated or maybe tore down and rebuilt, and hopefully they keep their historic character as well. So.
Okay.
If there's any further questions on the
Thank you for that. I'll ask, I think what I'm going to suggest going forward, in the previous discussion, getting into negotiations of could floors move back or whatnot was a bit of making sausage. And I apologize because I could have managed or chaired that portion of the discussion better. I think what I'm going to do is ask if there's questions of clarification based on what you've presented now. And then after that, I'll move the recommendation of administration, and then at that point, we can see if there are substantive changes to what's being recommended that Planning Commission members are considering. We can debate them at that time. So for now, I'll ask if there are questions of clarification. Councillor Faubert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would changing the third floor undermine the architectural concept that you're putting forward with this project as it currently is designed?
I mean, in my opinion, yes, we spent a lot of time ensuring that what we presented was what we would ultimately like to see. The bit of the variance, let's call it, that the town likes to see in the setbacks and the pushing and pulling, we could do it in the decks, split the decks so there was two. We had that in one render. That's a very easy change to make, which does change the face of that building. But you have to imagine too, this is not a big building. These lots are very narrow. This isn't going to stand out as much as we think, because it's very small blocks.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think that for me, I was hoping for you to convince me that what you've put forward in this shape is a cohesive architectural design versus what the guidelines in the land use bylaw are put forward in terms of what we might like to see on Main Street. Yeah, that makes sense. But I think you did a good job with your last answer, because that's just it. It's like,
Yeah.
if that one element is adjusted to meet the land use bylaw, is then the structure losing the architecture that you're trying to put forward? And I think that to me is the question that I was trying to get to the bottom of. So I'm grateful.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of clarification? Oh, sorry, Ms. Bissett.
Yeah, I recall you mentioned, I think in your earlier presentation, that you had engaged with the Historical Society, and I'm wondering if maybe you can elaborate on some of the conversations you've had and how they could have influenced the design, and if also, I don't know if you engaged any heritage expertise as part of this.
Well, the answer to all of that is yes. We have had those discussions. And, when you get into a group of people that are passionate about history, and my wife included in our household, there's going to be different opinions of what you should do, from saving a building, taking the building off, putting it on top of the new building, putting flags up, doing façadism, which seems to be the most popular form of, an ode to history. And, really, we spent a lot of time trying to find options and really did run into hurdles. I mean, this is now pushing 2 years. It's been 13 months and change from our development permit. And I'm not lying to you when I said we try and, between speaking with people that are either at the town or at the museum and everything else, I mean, everybody's got a suggestion of what to do, but when you look at the realities of where we're at and what we're trying to plan, it does become difficult. So, this was, and I did say in the earlier presentation, our first iteration of this was that brick on the outside. And so one of the first things that was said when we met with Jeannie and Ron was, there are no brick buildings in Canmore, and there never was. And it's nice that you were at Park City, that's a mining town, but this mining town didn't have that. So why don't you look at the other buildings like the Miners Hall, which is being protected, and the Canmore Hotel and all that, and go on down that route. And so that's kind of where it went, of where are our limitations, what can we save from this building, which, like Josh said, will be some siding on the outside. I think we can save some windows as well and use them as decoration, and maybe save the brick from the chimney that's there and use them as features. But generally speaking, I think our best attempt here is to tell the story. Like Josh said, you have the plaque out. We put our best intent in having something historically, what we think is a representation of Canmore, and go with that, because we would have loved to do more. It just isn't feasible, unfortunately. And it is sad, because, I mean, I know that the study of old buildings in Canmore, there were, when they last did the study, there were probably more than 2.5 times the amount of old houses that are left. And most of these, you know, the sad part about this process is that we could have just said, you know what, let's do the peaks and valleys of everything else, put up anything and not ask for any variances, and this cabin could have been sent to the dumpster, and that would have been that. And that hasn't been even close to what we wanted to do. So, in a roundabout way, I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay. Any other, Mr. Talbot?
So I look at the section 11 differently. It's the term standard is used, it's not a guideline. So I'm trying to wrap my head around, because Mr. Stransky said you could simply slide it back, you get your bigger deck, it accomplishes some things like that. And I'm kind of looking at this going, I don't think architecturally it changes it much, and it adheres to the standard, so to speak. So please convince me why I should support this as proposed versus saying, please adhere to the standard.
Are you suggesting that we just push the building back the 400 millimeters and be out of the variance?
Not the building. So if we look to the language in the standards, it's talking about second and third floors. The second floor, actually, I do like the way this looks, and it's more so the third floor is stepping back the building proper. You could leave the deck, and I don't want to get into the design of this, but if you left the deck and you just, where you have the settlers, does it say block? That whole section slides back. It's just a comment. And then you get your setbacks that are intended, in my opinion, under the standard. So convince me why that's a bad move.
What we looked at there, if you're talking about leaving the second deck at its current location, that's really what we wanted to preserve in this, because it does look like a bridge. Stepping back the upper floor 400 mils, I think that's entirely achievable. You might not get the visibility to the sign the further back you step, because you are going to be, we're looking at this in a render, and probably elevated render. If you're a pedestrian on the street, you're probably going to, that deck will probably obscure your signage. And the reference to Settler's Block, we feel that was important because it does tie the cabin to the street. But we're not, if pushing it back 400 mils satisfies CPC, we're pretty comfortable with that. I think it'll preserve what we wanted to achieve here.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay. Thank you very much. So I will move then that Canmore Planning Commission approve PL 2023-0003, subject to the conditions of approval set out in Schedule A. And I will ask for discussion on that at this point. Or do I have to have a seconder? I can never remember. No? Okay. Discussion. Councillor, Mr. Youngin.
Okay, so I think all of the commission is sort of trying to figure out where exactly we stand, whether we're happy with the building as is, or whether we need to shift the upper floor back a little bit. I think, if I'm reading the room correctly, that's sort of like the discussion here, and I think that it'd be good to have a bit of discussion and not just plop down a stance. In my opinion, the project could be approved as is. I would be comfortable with that. I think that if you're going to go to a false front type architecture, like a traditional mining architecture that existed in this town, then you should do that and just be consistent. what are the impacts on the streetscape and the community if you do that and you don't adhere to Part 11 of the architectural guidelines. I think it cuts off a little bit of sunlight and view from the street, and it doesn't maybe match with future buildings that would be built out to sort of the allowable envelope. And I think, in my opinion, the impact is not that great. And I'm just, trying to start a discussion here. There are 3-story buildings on Main Street. It's not a good example, but there's a pastel-colored stucco building straight across the street. There's at 7th and 7th, there's the new residential building there that's several stories high and doesn't substantially step back from the street. And I think as we densify our community, buildings are going to get slightly taller. I mean, we're going to 3 stories here. It's not a massive building. So I guess to sum up my perspective is I don't think that the negative impacts are that great. And there is a benefit to sort of maintaining the architectural integrity. If you're going to do that false front type architecture, then do it and just stick to it. And I think we should also be careful about sort of making design decisions on the fly here in commission. So I'll just start it off with that.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Faubert.
Thank you. I am in favor of supporting the approval as set out in the conditions currently. I'm really grateful for the conversation, and I really thank the applicants for letting us challenge a bit, especially in some awkward questions around what would this look like if it aligned with the land use bylaw in terms of that 2nd and 3rd level and town center requirements. But as a result of the discussion, and when I look at this building and I look at the front, what's clear to me is that by making that adjustment, we lose the historical design and architecture of the front of the building being that flat. And I think that it's the second balcony, like the 3rd floor balcony, and those windows you wouldn't see normally on a traditional mining town building here in the community. And so that's I feel like that brings it kind of more into a modern and expression of what that 3rd floor should be in terms of the needs of the buildings today in Canmore, because you do need the windows, and we all want a balcony. That's really right. So for me, I'm being able to, in my mind, imagine these 2 scenarios makes me more in favor of what's been proposed than I was before. And so I think that was a really good process and conversation. So I'm grateful to my colleagues.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Talbot.
I will be supporting it as proposed. I don't think the 0.4 meters would accomplish what these standards are set out to try to do, and it would look strange, I think, the more I look at it. So I will support it as proposed.
Okay. Councillor Hillstad.
I will support it as proposed. I think, again, you chose this particular style. Some people are going to like it. Some people aren't. That's architecture. There's you walk down Main Street, there's lots of buildings that some people are like, oh, that's a great building. And the next person walks by and is like, that's not a great building. So it is what it is when it comes to that. I think the design for that style of design, I think it's designed nicely for that style. Is it going to stick out a little bit? Yes, but at the same time, a little bit of diversity on the street front is not a bad thing. Yes, the section 11.5 speaks to trying to, keep setbacks and keep articulation kind of similar between buildings, but when you walk down Main Street right now, that's not the case anyways, because you have older buildings that are only 2 stories next to 3-story buildings, but those 2-story buildings are just square, flat front buildings that have no articulation whatsoever. And again, at some point, yes, those buildings were changed, but they might also be here for another 100 years. Who knows? Really, time will tell. I think the design as is, the variances, I don't think any, well, again, most of the conversation has been on the design guidelines and or requirements, and again, even those guidelines themselves are kind of gray and murky at times, because again, it's a point of time that those were written, and it just depends on who you talk to, whether people like that design or not. So I think the other variances are, it makes sense. The 0.4 for the balconies, again, now that I know that it was to incorporate the railway ties, I think that's actually quite a nice feature. So again, you have a little bit more overhang into the pedestrian, into the sidewalk, but it's up above your head. You're never going to notice it. You might notice it because of the railway ties, but I think the design that's there, I think it does represent what the current settler's cabin is. I can see aspects of the settler's cabin in that design, so I'm happy to support this.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Youngman.
So I'd like to echo Councillor Foubert's just appreciation of the fact that we had this conversation. I think it's always good when we can discuss history of the community and what kind of architecture we want. And I really hope that we can have more of those conversations here as Planning Commission focuses a little bit more on the architectural guidelines. And also like to echo Councillor Hillstad's comments about diversity on Main Street, diversity of architecture. You know, really the interesting thing about Main Street is when you can walk down there and you see different eras and you can see what people thought was the right thing to do at certain times. You know, like we've got an era where we thought we should be building Bavarian buildings in Canmore, you know, and it's kind of funny now, but that's the interesting part of Main Street, just to see that diversity. And so I think that goes back to how we look at the architectural guidelines as well. If we look at those as too prescriptive, we could end up, you know, as a community where all the buildings look the same, because there are communities where at one point in time they decided that they were going to be Bavarian communities, like Kimberley, BC, and so everything looks the same. You know, the Chamber of Commerce hires some guy to play Alphorn in the Platzl. You know, it's really cheesy, right? So I think it's important that when we discuss the architectural guidelines, we allow for a little bit of diversity, and it actually says in the guidelines they're intended to facilitate evolution, and that's sort of an evolution of what the community thinks is appropriate to build here. And so I think it's important that we have some flexibility and let things evolve and not be too prescriptive, and we'll let people come with these kind of proposals with something new and entertain those. Okay, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Well said. So, okay, the recommendation is up on the screen that Planning Commission approve PL 2023-0003, subject to the conditions of approval set out in Schedule A. All in favor? That is approved. Thank you very much, everyone. It was a great discussion. See, I